Hello, everybody. Today we're going to continue on with a new topic. Actually, a couple of different topics rolled into one. We're going to be talking about issues of gender and sexuality today, especially as it relates to particular issues that affect women in contemporary Native communities, as well as the sort of modern LGBTQ community within contemporary Native America, which is often referred to as the Two Spirits movement. We'll also talk a little bit, and you'll watch a short documentary about the boarding school movement. And I've sort of dovetailed that in here by relating it specifically to issues of women's fertility rights, and you'll see how that works out. But actually, it's really quite a separate issue and a really important one that has come up a couple times already, and will continue to be important as we go forward in the class. So do watch that video, which is linked out on Blackboard as well in a series of YouTube videos. But we'll start by talking about Native women, particularly stereotypes related to gender and Native women. We've talked quite a lot about Native stereotype as it relates to racial issues, but I want to talk about how that intersects with gender in really important ways. So we're going to go through three different kind of long-standing examples of the ways in which Native women and their bodies have been used as symbolic reference. So that means that their bodies have been kind of borrowed to be used as symbols for other things by non-Native people, usually by Europeans, by Westerners. So we'll go through those one by one. So the first trope, which I'm kind of calling it, I'm drawing this from other research, it's not my own research, so I'm drawing these terms from there. But the first term I'm using here is, quote, the Indian queen, right? And so you'll see a theme as these go through. And so in this trope, Native women's bodies are used to represent nature or the planet or something natural and untouched. And so this kind of actually works pretty comfortably with broader stereotypes and ways in which broader women's bodies are used as tropes for this as well. In art history, it's a long-standing tradition, and more broadly outside of art history, it's a very long tradition to kind of associate women and their bodies with nature or naturalness, or sometimes even in a more negative light, the savagery and things like that, whereas men's bodies are associated with culture and industry and all those things kind of contrasting nature. And so we can see that extended here very powerfully with the way in which women's bodies. More on a really grander scale, there's a lot of times in which women's bodies are actually meant to stand in for the New World itself, and sometimes the other continents, Africa and Asia's inferiority to Europe, and meaning that the Europe, often depicted as male, is dominating over North America. And so here is some. This is often seen in maps and paintings from the era of discovery and the era of European exploration. And so we can see some depictions here, and sometimes the gender of the different representations of the continents changes. We can see here in the image on the right, the image of Asia is female. The image of Africa is almost always depicted as male, which is tied up in all kinds of racial stuff that you might be familiar with. And the depiction of North and South America is almost always represented by a woman. In this case, we see Europe as represented by a woman here too, but sometimes the European symbol is represented as a man. And so there's gender dynamics as well as racial dynamics playing out in these depictions, but almost always North and South America are represented as a woman, and that's we see that in descriptive language and writing from the time as well, that the New World is described as feminine, as a woman, as a place that's ripe for taking, lots of sexual language directed at this land that's being conquered by Europeans. The second trope is the so-called Indian princess, and maybe the one you're most familiar with. Of course, the most famous being Pocahontas in her many, many different representations, not just the Disney one, although the Disney one is an important one because it's kind of really broadly consumed. But this is a long-standing trope, and Pocahontas has been a stand-in for it for a long time. Um, but Pocahontas is representative of Native women because Native women are supposed to be the avenue through which colonialism is going to happen. That through Native women, we will see Native people be Christianized, be anglicized, be appropriated in that way. And so the story of Pocahontas and her, sort of convincing to become a Christian, to become a European, to fall in love with a white man, that these things make her somehow an easier target for colonialism. And we can see this in art representations as well. This is obviously one that long predates the sort of Disney story. Excuse this little box here. Delete that. And we can see here that Pocahontas, there's a lot of stuff going on here with color, the whiteness of her dress. She is often depicted as lighter skinned than men, the sort of male native figures over here on the right, but certainly darker skinned than the European figures. She is this sort of transitionary figure from native, from savage to civilized in these ongoing tropes. And the last and maybe the most damaging is the so-called Indian squaw, and that's a term, again, not my own term, but one I'm drawing from literature. And this is sort of the opposite side of the story from the Pocahontas, the Indian princess character. And this is, we can also see the other side of the noble savage coin here as well. And this is where Native women are meant to be lustful, highly sexualized, violent, tough, individualistic, naturalistic, so on and so forth. Often racially depicted as darker skinned, and also, again, this notion is an appropriated idea by white Americans who see this as part of the wild and free nature of America. And so a lot of modern representations of Native women tap into this notion. So if you walk through the mall and you see the sort of cheesy store that's selling, American Indian stuff, inspired stuff, they often have these images of highly sexualized Native, nearly nude Native women that certainly fit into this trope, and so on and so forth. Now, the problem with all of these, but especially I think the Indian squaw stereotype, is that it leads to a hypersexualization of Native women, not real American Indian women, of course, but especially white women dressed as American Indians, and it creates a notion that Indian women are supposed to be available to fulfill the sexual desires of white men, and so we can see this, of course, in hot, sexy Halloween costumes of the sort of sexy Pocahontas figure on Victoria's Secret runways. There's a link here, by the way, when you open the PowerPoint. This links out to I think if you click on this picture, to an article from a really great blog called Native Appropriations that talks about this in a lot greater detail if you're interested in taking that a little bit further. We're not actually approaching Halloween. I usually teach this course in the fall, and this often falls right around Halloween, so it's a good time to sort of think about this. But next time Halloween does come around in a matter of a few months. Take a look and think about these issues as you go. And but all of that is based on really seriously disturbing statistics that come from Indian country and affect Native women specifically. And so these are drawn from a New York Times article in 2012 about cases of rape on reservations. And these are all direct quotes. 1 in 3 American Indian women have been raped or have experienced an attempted rape. You are all probably pretty familiar with the fact that experiences of sexual assault are very high for just about all women, but they are even higher among Native women. Some of the highest cases of sexual assault. Here's another quote. In the Navajo Nation, which encompasses parts of Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah, 329 rape cases reported in 2007 among a population of about 180,000. 5 years later, there have been only 17 arrests. Women's advocates on the reservation say only about 10% of sexual assaults are reported. So this means very low reporting rates, and if you do report, incredibly low rates of prosecution. And there's very specific reasons for that, having to do with legal gray areas. There's a great deal of literature about this that I would encourage you guys to go check out if you want to learn more about this. But the reservations tend to be these kind of legal gray areas where it's difficult to prosecute men who come onto the reservation and rape women, Native women who live there. And interrelational violence is also really, really high, meaning violence and sexual assault between romantic partners or people who are supposed to be romantic partners. And it's very difficult to prosecute these men because of the legal limbo that the reservation creates. And so there's definitely a problem of white men who go onto reservations and victimize women knowing that they are very unlikely to face consequences for it. A bit more statistics here. In South Dakota, Indians make up 10% of the population, but account for 40% of the victims of sexual assault. Nationwide, arrests made in 13% of sexual assaults against Native women, compared to 35% for Black and 32% for white people. So, very, 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 very low rates of actual arrests or prosecutions made in these cases.